It is NFL Daily by Chat Sports. Tyler Jones, your fearless leader, here with you as we are breaking down cut candidates, surprise cut candidates for all 32 teams across the National Football League. We have surveyed our staff here at Chat Sports and the teams that they cover, and they sent us back a list of surprise cut candidates, one for every team that could ultimately be gone when we get to cutdown day, when the roster goes from 90 to 53. So without further ado, let's get started in the NFC East. That's where we find Kelvin Joseph of the Dallas Cowboys on the list. Joseph, better at the nickel spot, but still ultimately might not make it for Dallas with where their needs are at right now. The New York Giants, that's where we find Sterling Shepard, the former Oklahoma Sooner, was out for much of last year with an ACL injury, and as he's made his return to New York, he's been kind of passed up on the depth chart, forgotten about of some sorts as time has gone on. Meanwhile, for the Philadelphia Eagles, that's where we find Nicholas Morrow at the linebacker position, currently getting beat out by Cunningham as well as Jacoby Dean for playing time. And then for the Washington Commanders, that is where we find Rachad Wildgoose at the corner position, who has had a very disappointing preseason to this point. I mean, you look back at that second preseason game against the Ravens. The Ravens were playing third and fourth string quarterbacks, and they picked that Commanders defense apart. To the NFC North we go now. That's where we find running back Deonta Freeman with this spot. And what we've seen with Chicago, Khalil Herbert's going to be your starting running back, and they've had other guys like Roschon Johnson emerge that could take playing time away that might make it difficult for Foreman to have a spot. To Detroit, that's where we find big Levi potentially on the list. And what's going on with Detroit, you got to revamp defense, and he struggled with injuries, so it might just not work out to have a spot to hold on for Levi there in Detroit. To Green Bay, the running back position, that's where we find Patrick Taylor on this list. And with Green Bay, we have seen they've had a dynamic 1-2 punch with Aaron Jones and Dillon there the last couple of years. A.J. Dillon, who they drafted from Boston College. And what they did last year at the beginning of the season was they went with those two guys and they worked them to death, basically. And Patrick Taylor initially didn't make the 53-man roster. Well, with that said, what you're likely to see is they do the same thing again, where Dillon makes the roster there, and along with Jones, and then until there's an injury or something, then they possibly bring back Patrick Taylor or somebody else. The Vikings, we find corner Andrew Booth on this list. Not too long ago, this guy was a second-round pick, but as Brian Flores has come in as the new defensive coordinator for the Minnesota Vikings, it hasn't necessarily been a scheme fit for what Flores is looking for defensively in that corner room and what Andrew Booth brings to the table. We are through a couple divisions, still got more to go, but our pinned comment today, name a surprise cut candidate from your favorite team. Here's your chance to weigh in. Tell us in the comments section who your team is and who is a guy that could surprise everybody and ultimately get cut. Whether it's somebody we've talked about on today's show or somebody else, weigh in the comments section. Give me one player who could be a surprise cut candidate from your favorite team. To the NFC South we go. That is where we find corner Tre Flowers on this list. And in Flowers' case, this is a guy that might just not have enough room on the roster as the Falcons are showing some depth at the corner position. To Carolina, that is where we find Xavier Woods at the safety spot. And if the Panthers move on from Xavier Woods, they could save $4.5 million against the cap potentially if they were to make this move. Meanwhile, the New Orleans Saints, Will Lutz is on this list. And I know that Will Lutz has become kind of a household name of sorts, especially among the NFC South. But it looks like that he's getting beat out by their rookie kicker, Blake Group, for that spot. It looks like that Blake is ultimately going to win that job, and Will should be a free agent. Can't imagine him being a free agent for too long, though. Somebody might pick him up. Meanwhile, the Buccaneers, that's where we find wide receiver David Moore. And you look at what's going on with the Buccaneers. We've seen Palmer and Jarrett are emerging. Russell Gage is out for the rest of the season. He got injured last week, so that might be the saving grace for David Moore to still land a roster spot, but it's not looking too great for him. We mentioned household names. How about Colt McCoy? College legend at the University of Texas. He's had a decent career as a backup, and he's won a lot of games as a backup quarterback over the years. Remember, he was part of that class with Bradford, and Tebow, and Jimmy Clausen and company. He's the last one standing, and he's had a decent career as a backup. But you look at the Arizona Cardinals, and Clayton Tune, their rookie out of Houston, is emerging, and it looks like he would likely be the backup there to start potentially with Kyler Murray around. A lot of it depends on how long it takes for Murray to officially recover there. To the Los Angeles Rams, and that is where we find corner Robert Rochell at this spot. And basically the problem with Rochell is that the Rams are kind of looking for more size in the secondary right now, not necessarily the right fit for what the Rams want to do on defense. To the San Francisco 49ers, that's where we find kicker Jake Moody. Yes, the former third-round pick might already be on the way out. The mustache might not be his saving grace, as Jake Moody missed 2 field goals, 1 PAT, and barely made a chip shot game-winning field goal in the preseason so far. Moody has not looked good. To Seattle we go. That is where we find Mr. Young, a former 7th-round pick last year, earned his way on the 53-man roster. There was a lot of excitement about what he could potentially bring to the Seahawks team. But now you've had the emergence of Jake Bobo, the undrafted free agent out of UCLA, who has led the Seahawks in receiving. And Young is coming off just a bad night in the last preseason game for Seattle on Saturday. That leaves him in limbo, where he ultimately could be gone in what is a much more stacked receiver room in Seattle than what we've seen in years previously. We shift gears now to the AFC. That's where we find Buffalo running back Latavius Murray. And with talk about the Bills potentially wanting to upgrade the running back position, maybe for a guy like Jonathan Taylor potentially, Latavius Murray could ultimately be the odd man out. Remember, they already have Cook and Harris as well, but Murray might be the one on the chopping block. To Miami, that's where we find Chosen Anderson, formerly known as Robbie Anderson. And the thing with Chosen is the contract situation. He has no guaranteed money, so it would be easier for him to be able to move on from. And he's had a very quiet preseason. He's kind of been missing in action of some sorts for Miami there. Meanwhile, the Patriots. The Patriots on our list is Trace McSorley. And what I think is the surprise here is not necessarily him not being one of the top quarterbacks for New England, but the fact that this guy started NFL games last year in Arizona and all of a sudden might not have a spot on a 53-man roster. It went from 100 to 0 real quick for Trace McSorley. And there's a lot of hype about Malik Cunningham. We know about the new emergency QB3 rule. And if you're the Patriots, you're probably better off, if you're going to have an emergency 3, going with the young cat and Malik Cunningham, who's certainly caught a lot of attention, a great athlete in his own right, than sticking with McSorley, who really struggled last year in Arizona. The last team in this division, the New York Jets, we find Bryce Hall. Not Breece Hall, but Bryce Hall. What's going on there with the Jets is that Hall is quickly becoming an afterthought. When you have guys like Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed and among others there, Bryce Hall is kind of being pushed to the wayside of some sort. So watch out there. We'll see if he ultimately makes the team or not. Name a cut candidate from your team that you think should make the roster. Who is kind of on the bubble that we are sitting here and we're not sure is ultimately going to make it or not? Give me one name, a guy you're rooting for on your favorite team that you'd like to see end up making the roster. That's a roster bubble candidate. Give me a name that comes to mind. Let us know in the comments section below. Today's show is presented by BetUS, the exclusive sportsbook partner of Chat Sports. You go to chatsports.com/bet. You can get a 125% deposit bonus. Put $100 down, get $125 to spend for free at chatsports.com/bet when you enter that promo code NFL Daily at checkout. Odds for the Super Bowl. The Chiefs are the favorites, plus 600. Philadelphia, plus 700. Can we see a Super Bowl rematch there? Meanwhile, the Bills, plus 900. 49ers and the Bengals at plus 1,000. If you want to go ahead and place a future on the Super Bowl, or if you want to bet on some weekly action here in the preseason, or maybe you want to bet on what's going on in Major League Baseball, golf, motorsports, soccer, whatever it may be, BetUS is the place to do it. Go to chatsports.com/bet, promo code NFL Daily for that 125% deposit bonus. To the AFC North we go. There was a lot of hype about James Proche at one point there in Baltimore and the role that he would have with that team. Things have kind of gone downhill since. Had an awful preseason game on Monday night against Washington, and he keeps falling down the depth chart, getting passed up piece by piece. Right now, he would be lucky just to be the number 5 receiver potentially for Baltimore if he can make the roster. Meanwhile, for the Bengals, we find offensive lineman Jackson Carman. And here's the deal with Carman. He just isn't good. And the talent around him in Cincinnati, I know that the Bengals have had a lot of question marks with their offensive line over the years, but they've greatly improved. The Bengals have made tremendous progress with that group, while Carman hasn't. He could be on the way out. For the Browns, that's where we find Jakeem Grant at the wide receiver spot. Missed all of last year with a torn ACL. He agreed to take a pay cut, and even then, there still might not be a spot for him there in Cleveland. The final team of the AFC North, that is the Pittsburgh Steelers, and that is where we find center Kendrick Green, former third-round pick. He's been a major disappointment so far in the preseason. Just has not lived up to the expectations he could ultimately be on the way out. To the AFC South, let's start with the Houston Texans and Brevin Jordan at the tight end spot. Shown some promise, but injured all offseason. Not a great blocker as well. Might not necessarily be what the Texans are looking for. The Colts wide receiver Isaiah McKenzie makes this list. And I know some people are talking about McKenzie potentially being a starter there for Indianapolis, but think about this. You already have Pittman, you got Perryman, you got Downs. Where does McKenzie fit into that bunch? The Jags, that's where we find JaMycal Hasty at this spot. Jags have a loaded running back room led by Travis Etienne and company. And then Johnson and Connor and others. Is Hasty going to beat out those guys there? He might ultimately be on the chopping block. To Tennessee, Malik Willis. Yes, Malik Willis. Third-round pick last year. And we already know that the Titans have kind of already mentally moved on from Malik Willis as they're going forward with Ryan Tannehill and Will Levis. And I can't imagine there being much of a trade market for Malik Willis. From what we saw last year, he did not look good. And what we've seen so far this offseason in camp and everything, Willis hasn't done that great either. Why would anyone give up assets for Malik Willis at this point in time? To me, that might be a deal where Tennessee, with a new GM and everything, just cuts their losses and moves on and says, we're done with Malik Willis. We're only going to carry 2 quarterbacks. Tannehill and Levis are our guys. What do you guys think? Will the Titans keep Malik Willis? Is he going to be back in Tennessee at the start of this season? Weigh in the comment section. Y for yes, in for no. Is Willis back or not? What do you think on Malik Willis? Tell me what you feel one way or the other. Folks, you got to subscribe to Chat Sports as we cover the NFL each and every day with the latest roster moves, cuts, and more. Anytime there's something big that happens in the NFL, you know we're going to stop what we're doing. We're going to make you a video, and we're going to break it all down for you here on NFL Daily. This is the place to be if you're a huge NFL fan. You ain't alive if you ain't subscribed to NFL Daily by Chat Sports. Subscribe now, turn on notifications so you stay up to date what's going on across the National Football League. To the AFC West, our final division, Albert O. Man, it has been quite the fall from grace for Albert O. He went from being the top tight end there in Denver, tight end 1, to now all the way falling to tight end number 5. He's just completely fallen off the face of the earth. his days might be over. Former first-round pick quarterback Blaine Gabbert might be done in Kansas City, as Kansas City has been very high. We've seen Andy Reid and company really like Shane Buechele. And if they go with two quarterbacks, they might rather go with the younger guy in Shane Buechele than Blaine Gabbert potentially for that spot. The biggest name of the entire show, Khalil Mack, makes our surprise cut candidates list. Here's the deal with Khalil Mack. He's owed $16.6 million this upcoming season. And if you move on from him, you're looking at a cap casualty situation. Maybe you even just renegotiate and get him to take less money potentially. But the truth of the matter is this. Although Khalil Mack might end up being a Hall of Famer and all, the production that the Chargers are paying for, they're not getting. He's not having those double-digit sack years anymore. Khalil Mack has taken a step back. They're not getting what they paid at this point in time. Mack, I think, has been fantastic, but $16 million and not getting the production of $16 million is a problem for Los Angeles. Final player on our list, we go to the Las Vegas Raiders. That's where we find defensive tackle Matthew Butler. Last year, he was a healthy scratch in multiple games. He's been struggling throughout this preseason. Could see the Raiders ultimately move on from him. So there you have it. That is a look at our surprise cut candidates for every team across the National Football League. For more NFL coverage, give me a follow on Twitter, @TylerJonesLive. You can find me there talking about the National Football League. And I'll see you next time, right here on NFL Daily.